In the shadow of rugged mountains, they sold him a fat, blind bride. The deceit was calculated, the betrayal planned to the letter. The consequences would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The drums echoed through the mountain peaks, a foreign rhythm that pulled Elias from his solitary routine. He paused, axe mid-swing, as the unfamiliar sounds drifted upward from the valley below. For 15 years, he had lived alone on this mountainside, speaking more to wolves than people, his calloused hands knowing only the language of survival. Yet today, the wind carried celebration, not for harvest or solstice, but for his wedding. Elias trudged down the narrow path, each step reluctant. No one had consulted him about this union. 3 days prior, Elder Brynjar had appeared at his cabin door with a formal summons, invoking an ancient law that bound unmarried men to serve the village's needs. The festival of first thaw demands balance, the elder had explained, avoiding Elias's thunderous gaze. You've been chosen. The feasting hall blazed with torchlight when he arrived, villagers packed shoulder to shoulder, their curious eyes following his every move. Children pointed and whispered behind cupped hands. Women assessed his unkempt beard and wild hair with disapproving glances. Men nodded stiffly, some hiding smirks behind their cups of mead. Old matron Liza stood at the hall's center, her bony fingers clutching the marriage contract. The village matron's face remained impassive, but satisfaction glinted in her eyes as she gestured Elias forward. "The mountain man honors us with his presence," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner. "Today we bind solitude to service." Whispers intensified as a figure was led forward, a woman in traditional wedding garb, her face concealed behind an ornate veil. Elias noticed how the villagers created space around her, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. Someone behind him muttered about blindness, another about her size. He caught fragments. Couldn't see to weave anymore. Then, perfect match for the hermit. Matron Lysa raised the ceremonial cup. By the traditions of our ancestors, during the festival of first thaw, we join these two souls. She thrust the mead toward Elias. Drink and seal your bond to Anya. The liquid burned his throat, unfamiliar after years of spring water. The woman, Anya, accepted the cup with surprising grace, her movements deliberate as she sipped without spilling a drop despite her blindness. Jorik, the village blacksmith, called out from the crowd, "A fitting pair, the wild man and the blind weaver." Laughter rippled through the hall. Elias stood rigid as the final words were spoken, binding him to this stranger. The villagers watched, some with mockery, others with genuine curiosity about how the mountain man would handle a wife, especially one they clearly considered damaged. Yet tradition reigned supreme in the valley, and now, whether he wished it or not, Elias was no longer alone. The feasting hall fell silent as the final ritual began. Elias stood before Anya, his calloused hands visibly trembling. Years of solitude had not prepared him for this moment. Standing before a hall of onlookers, about to see the face of the woman who was now his wife. The mountain man's fingers reached for the edge of the heavy fabric, rough skin catching on the delicate weave. As he lifted the veil, Elias barely registered Anya's unseeing eyes or her round features. Instead, his gaze locked onto the intricate pattern embroidered along the veil's border, a series of interlocking symbols that sent a jolt through his body. The pattern was unmistakable, the same secret motif his mother had taught him as a child, a design she claimed belonged only to their bloodline. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. The shock hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled beneath him, and Elias collapsed to the hard-packed earth floor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as villagers exchanged knowing glances. They had expected revulsion at the sight of his blind bride, and his reaction seemed to confirm their cruel assumptions. Look how he falls at the sight of her. Jorik sneered from his place near the forge tools displayed proudly on the wall. The blacksmith's voice carried across the hall, encouraging snickers from those eager to mock the mountain man's discomfort. Elder Brynjar stepped forward with concern etched on his weathered face. But before he could intervene, old matron Lysa raised her hand to silence the gathering. "The binding is complete," she announced with finality, her eyes revealing a glint of satisfaction. "What the festival of first thaw has joined cannot be undone." Throughout the commotion, Anya remained standing, her posture straight and dignified. Though blind, her face revealed an awareness that transcended sight. Her fingers lightly traced the edge of her now lifted veil, touching the very pattern that had so affected her new husband. "Stand, mountain man," she said softly, her voice carrying unexpected strength. "The ceremony is finished." Marta, watching from near the herbalist's table, observed the exchange with keen interest. Her eyes narrowed as she noted the pattern on the veil and Elias's reaction to it. As Elias slowly regained his footing, the villagers began to disperse, their entertainment concluded. Yet he remained transfixed by the impossible connection between this blind weaver and the mother he had lost years ago. The pattern that had brought him to his knees now bound him to Anya with ties far stronger than the marriage ritual itself. Ties woven of mystery and shared history he could not yet comprehend. The first warm breeze of spring swept through the valley, melting the snow in patches and revealing the earth beneath. Elias Stonehaven guided Anya along the narrow path to his cabin, perched high on the mountainside where few dared to venture. The journey had been arduous, with Anya feeling her way carefully over unfamiliar terrain, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Home," Elias muttered, the word foreign on his tongue. For years, this isolated dwelling had been his refuge from the world below, a place where silence reigned supreme. Now that silence was broken by the soft padding of Anya's feet across the wooden floor, the whisper of her skirts against furniture, and the gentle humming that accompanied her work. The cabin seemed to shrink around him. Every corner that once offered solitude now held her presence. At night, he would lie awake, acutely aware of her breathing from the small pallet he'd constructed near the hearth. The scent of wild herbs clung to her hair and clothes, lavender, rosemary, and something distinctly her own, filling the space that had known only the smell of pine and smoke. "You'll need to tell me where everything belongs," she said one morning, her fingers tracing the edge of a wooden bowl. The mountain man watched, fascinated despite himself, as she mapped his home through touch, creating an invisible landscape only she could see. Down in the village, tongues wagged relentlessly. "Poor Elias," they whispered over steaming mugs in the feasting hall. "Tricked into taking a blind bride who can't even tend a proper fire." The gossip spread like wildfire, each retelling more embellished than the last. Jorik, massive arms folded across his chest, held court at his forge. "I saw him dragging her up the mountain path," the blacksmith boomed to anyone who would listen. "Like a man hauling his own punishment. What use is a blind woman to a mountain man? She'll tumble off a cliff before summer's end." His laughter rang out, harsh and mocking, encouraging others to join in his cruelty. Elder Brynjar frowned at such talk, but did little to stop it. The village had always viewed Elias with suspicion, his preference for solitude an affront to their communal ways. Now, his strange marriage provided fresh fuel for their resentment. Meanwhile, in the cabin above, Anya quietly proved her worth. She learned the exact number of steps between the hearth and the door, between the table and the water barrel. She memorized the feel of each pot and tool, the sound of approaching wolves, and the warning creak of branches heavy with snow. And Elias, despite his determination to maintain distance, found himself watching her with growing wonder as she carved out a place for herself in his solitary world. Elias Harmon watched with growing astonishment as Anya moved through his cabin, Despite her blindness, she navigated the cramped space with remarkable precision, her fingertips barely grazing the rough-hewn walls as she counted steps between the hearth and table. Within days, she had memorized every corner, every uneven floorboard, and every hanging pot. "How do you know where everything is?" he finally asked one morning, his voice rusty from disuse. Anya smiled, her hands busy kneading dough. "I listen to how sounds change in different parts of the room. The echo near the door is different from the corner by your bed." The mountain man watched as she tied small knots in rope at strategic places around the cabin, subtle markers only she could read. She placed fragrant herbs in different corners, creating a map of scents that transformed his stark dwelling into something that felt, for the first time in years, like a home. Outside, she was equally confident. She had fashioned a walking stick and marked the paths to the stream and woodpile with small stones. Elias found himself strangely moved by her quiet determination, though he kept his distance, still uncomfortable with this woman who had been thrust into his life. One evening, dark clouds gathered over the peaks, bringing a sudden, violent storm. Elias had gone to check his snares when the downpour began. The familiar landscape transformed in minutes. Streams overflowed, landmarks disappeared in sheets of rain, and thunder shook the very ground beneath his feet. Disoriented and soaked to the bone, he stumbled through the blinding rain, panic rising as he realized he had lost his way. The cabin could be anywhere in this white wall of water. Then, impossibly, he heard her calling, "Elias, follow my voice." He turned toward the sound, squinting through the deluge. There stood Anya at the edge of a rock formation, her dress plastered to her body, one hand extended toward him. "How did you find me?" he shouted over the storm's fury. "I heard the water changing course beneath the rocks," she answered, taking his arm with surprising strength. "The stream always leads home." Together they made their way back to the cabin, her steps more certain than his own. Once inside, as they huddled by the fire drying their clothes, Elias studied her face in the flickering light. This blind woman, whom the villagers had mocked and whom he had resented, had just saved him on his own mountain. "Thank you," he said simply. Anya nodded, wringing water from her long hair. "We survive together now," she replied, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his. "That's what marriage means in the mountains, doesn't it?" Spring had fully arrived in the mountains, bringing with it a riot of wildflowers and the sweet scent of thawing earth. Elias Stoneheart found himself caught in a strange limbo, both trapped and inexplicably drawn to the woman who now shared his solitary existence. Each morning, he watched Anya move about the cabin with quiet purpose, her fingers trailing along familiar paths she had created for herself. She asked for little, complained even less, and carried herself with a dignity that left him both bewildered and impressed. "The herbs need tending," she would say, her voice soft but certain, and he would guide her to the small garden patch outside their cabin, marveling at how quickly she learned the layout, memorizing each step and turn. In the village below, the whispers grew louder with each passing day. When Elias ventured down for supplies, he felt the weight of stairs and hushed conversations that ceased the moment he approached. "How fares your blind bargain?" Jorik called out one afternoon as Elias traded pelts for salt. The blacksmith's voice carried across the marketplace, drawing snickers from those nearby. "Does she bump into walls, or have you trained her like one of your mountain dogs?" The mountain man's hands tightened around the leather pouch of salt, but he said nothing. Elder Brinjar, witnessing the exchange, offered Elias a sympathetic nod, but remained silent, bound by tradition not to interfere. That evening, as Elias returned to the cabin, he found Anya weaving by the hearth, her fingers dancing across the threads with remarkable precision. She had created a small tapestry depicting the mountain landscape he had described to her, his world translated through her imagination. "They mock what they fear. she said without turning, somehow sensing his troubled mood. And they fear what they cannot understand. For the first time since their union, he sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. And what is it they cannot understand? She smiled, her unseeing eyes reflecting the firelight. That sometimes the strongest bonds form in the unlikeliest places. In that moment, something shifted in Elias's heart. The woman before him was neither burden nor stranger, but someone who understood isolation in ways even he could not fathom. Later that night, as wolves howled in the distance, he made a silent vow. Whatever whispers plagued the valley, whatever taunts Jorik might devise, his loyalty would remain with Anya. Even as doubts about rejoining the world of people lingered in his mind, he knew with certainty that the quiet space they had created together had become more precious than his cherished solitude ever was. The midsummer fair arrived with a riot of color and noise that drew everyone from their homes. Elias reluctantly guided Anya down the winding path from their mountain cabin to the valley below, where villagers had already gathered in excited clusters. The scent of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the air as merchants displayed their wares on wooden tables. "The blacksmith's contest begins at midday," Elias murmured, his calloused hand gently steering Anya through the crowd. He had avoided the fair for years, but now found himself thrust into its center. Jorik stood by his forge, hammer in hand, his booming laugh drawing attention as he boasted to onlookers. The blacksmith caught sight of Elias, and his smile twisted. "The mountain man graces us with his presence, and brings his bride to witness his shame." Elias felt his jaw tighten, but said nothing. The contest was traditional. Each smith would forge a small knife within a time limit, to be judged on craftsmanship and speed. "You should enter," Anya said quietly, her fingers finding his arm with unerring accuracy. "Show them what mountain steel can do." Her confidence in him was still unfamiliar, but warming. Reluctantly, he nodded and approached the registration table. While Elias prepared for the contest, Anya made her way to the Weaving Guild's pavilion. She carried her creation wrapped in linen cloth, moving with such certainty that few would guess her blindness. The mountain man watched her go with a mixture of pride and concern. At the pavilion, Anya unwrapped her tapestry and presented it to the guild mistresses. The cloth revealed an intricate pattern of interwoven symbols, the same mysterious design that had adorned her wedding veil. Her fingers traced the edges with practiced familiarity. "This is unusual work," one woman said, her voice tight with forced politeness. Another leaned closer. "These patterns are old. Where did you learn them?" Anya smiled serenely. "The wind taught me, and my mother before that." Whispers rippled through the gathered weavers. Old matron Lisa pushed through the crowd, her face darkening as she recognized the symbols. "This is not proper guild work," she declared loudly. "These patterns are discouraged." But the damage was done. The women of the guild circled the tapestry, fingers hovering over the intricate work, murmuring in tones that mixed awe with unease. Across the fairground, the forging contest began. Elias worked the bellows, his muscles straining as Jorik smirked from his station. The mountain man's thoughts, however, remained with Anya and the silent storm her weaving might unleash, a pattern that connected them both to secrets neither fully understood, but which now lay exposed before the curious eyes of the village. The iron rang against iron as Jorik's hammer fell with practiced precision. The blacksmith's muscles rippled beneath his soot-stained tunic, each blow calculated to impress the gathered crowd. Elias stood opposite him, sweat beading on his brow as he worked his own piece with less flourish but careful attention. "Is that the best you can do, mountain man?" Jorik called out, loud enough for all to hear. "No wonder they had to find you a blind wife. No woman with sight would have you." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Elias kept his eyes on his work, though his knuckles whitened around the hammer handle. When the final pieces were presented, there was no question of the outcome. Jorik's ornate candle holder gleamed with intricate detail, while Elias's simpler creation, though sturdy, lacked the artistry the village appreciated. "The winner is Jorik," announced Elder Brynjar, raising the blacksmith's arm. The crowd cheered as Jorik basked in his victory. What surprised everyone was Elias's reaction. Instead of storming away as expected, he approached his rival and nodded respectfully. "Fine work," he said simply, before turning to leave. This small gesture of dignity did not go unnoticed. 3 of the village elders exchanged meaningful glances. One of them, a weather-beaten man with a silver beard, muttered to his companions, "The mountain teaches patience." Perhaps we judged too quickly. Across the fairgrounds, Anya's tapestry had drawn a different kind of attention. Marta, the village herbalist, ran her fingers over the intricate patterns woven into the cloth, her eyes widening with recognition. "These aren't mere decorations," she whispered to Anya. "These are protection symbols, ancient ones. My grandmother taught me these were woven to guard against betrayal and false hearts." Anya's fingers continued their work, feeling the threads as she spoke. "My mother taught me, said they would keep me safe when eyes could not." When Elias returned, his defeat weighing heavily on his shoulders, Marta pulled him aside. "Your wife's weaving bears marks of the old knowledge," she explained, pointing to specific patterns. "See here? This spiral turning back on itself, it wards off those who speak with forked tongues." Elias studied the tapestry, recognition dawning in his eyes. "My mother had a cloth with similar markings. She said it was family protection." "This is no coincidence," Marta said, her voice low. "Such patterns are passed through bloodlines, taught only to those deemed worthy." That night, as they walked the long path home, Elias considered Marta's words. The marriage that had seemed a cruel joke, a blind woman paired with a recluse, now appeared in a different light. Perhaps old matron Lysa had known more than she revealed when arranging their union. Perhaps there were connections between his family and Anya's that ran deeper than anyone had told him. The arrival of Rurik, the traveling peddler, coincided with the first golden leaves of late summer. His wagon creaked into the village square one morning, laden with trinkets and tales in equal measure. Villagers gathered eagerly around his cart, not just for his wares, but for news from beyond their isolated valley. Elias Rurik stood at the edge of the crowd, uncomfortable with the press of bodies, but needing supplies for the coming season. The peddler's eyes lit up with recognition when he spotted the mountain man. "There he is," Rurik called out, his voice carrying across the square. "The man who lives with the cursed blind woman." A hush fell over the gathering. Elias felt his jaw tighten as Rurik continued, spinning elaborate yarns about how blind weavers were known to attract misfortune, how their fingers could weave doom into cloth. "I've seen it before," the merchant insisted. "Crops failing, children sickening, all after a blind woman settled nearby." By sundown, the damage was done. When Elias approached the miller's wife to trade pelts for grain, she hesitated, making the sign against evil before reluctantly accepting half the usual amount. At the herbalist's hut, Marta alone treated him fairly, though she whispered warnings about the changing mood in the village. "They're frightened people," she told him, pressing extra dried herbs into his hands. "Fear makes fools of us all." The journey back to his cabin was heavier than the climb down had been. Elias found Anya sitting by the hearth, her fingers working deftly at a small loom. "They believe we're cursed now," he said bluntly, setting down his meager trades. "The peddler has poisoned their minds." Anya's hands stilled. "And what do you believe?" The question caught him off guard. 5 months ago, he might have believed such superstitions himself. Now, watching her capable movements, the notion seemed absurd. "I believe we need to prepare," he answered finally. "If they won't trade, we must become more self-sufficient." To his surprise, Anya smiled. "Then teach me." she said simply. Show me how to set snares, how to find the plants that grow where others don't look. I may not see the forest, but I can learn its secrets. In the days that followed, trade with the village dwindled to nothing. Jorik the blacksmith refused outright to sharpen Elias's tools, and even Elder Brynjar turned away when they passed on the mountain path. Yet each evening, Anya listened intently as Elias described the patterns of animal movements, the smell of edible roots, the sound of water beneath rocks. Her determination never wavered, even as their stores grew leaner. We'll survive this, she told him one night, her voice steady in the darkness. Long after Rurik's words are forgotten. The morning frost crunched beneath their boots as Elias led Anya through the forest. His calloused hands guided hers over the supple wire of the snare, teaching through touch what others learned through sight. Feel how it gives just enough, he murmured, surprised by his own patience. Too tight and it snaps, too loose and the hair escapes. Anya nodded, her fingers dancing over the mechanism with unexpected precision. By their third outing, he had memorized the distinct sound each type of ground made underfoot, identifying the packed earth of animal trails without assistance. They move like water, she explained, kneeling to set a trap where Elias would have overlooked. The creatures follow paths of least resistance, just as streams do. Within a fortnight, her snares yielded twice the catch of his. The mountain man found himself learning from the woman he was meant to teach. Her blindness, rather than a hindrance, had sharpened her other senses to detect subtleties he had never considered. Word spread to the valley below. Villagers who had sneered at the match began to whisper new tales. The blind woman was becoming something of a legend, the one who could outwit even the reclusive trapper at his own craft. Jorik scoffed openly at the rumors in the forge. Beginner's luck, the blacksmith declared, hammering metal with unnecessary force. Or he's letting her win out of pity. But when three families traded goods for Anya's rabbit pelts rather than Elias's, even the most skeptical took notice. Their partnership faced its greatest test when autumn winds brought an early chill. That night, a desperate bear, lean from poor foraging, circled their cabin. The massive creature, driven by hunger, began clawing at their door. The fire, Anya whispered, already moving toward the hearth. Animals fear flames. Elias grabbed burning branches while she stoked the main fire higher. Together they burst outside, brandishing their fiery weapons with synchronized movements. The bear reared back, confused by their unified defense. For nearly an hour they maintained their stand, moving in concert without need for words. When the predator finally retreated into the darkness, they stood breathless in the yard, connected by something deeper than marriage vows or village contracts. Back inside, Elias watched Anya tend the fire, her movements sure despite the darkness that was her constant companion. Something had shifted between them, a respect born not from obligation, but from survival shared. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the change. Their union, forced by tradition and sealed by the festival of first thaw, had transformed into something neither had expected. A partnership forged in the face of wilderness, stronger than either could be alone. Autumn leaves crunched beneath Elias's boots as he and Anya made their way down the mountain path toward the village. The harvest festival, a cornerstone of valley tradition, loomed before them like an executioner's block. Every household was expected to contribute, displaying the fruits of their summer labor as offerings for winter's blessing. We have little to show, Elias muttered, his calloused hand gripping the small bundle of mountain herbs and dried berries they'd managed to gather. The solitary man had never cared for village opinions before, but now, with Anya beside him, a weight of judgment pressed upon his shoulders. The blind weaver walked confidently beside him, her steps sure despite the uneven path. What we bring is honest work, she replied, her quiet dignity unwavering. The feasting hall buzzed with activity as villagers arranged elaborate displays of grain, vegetables, and preserved meats. Yorick stood proudly beside his contribution, a magnificent set of iron tools and a bountiful harvest from his fertile lands. The blacksmith's booming laugh cut through the chatter as Elias and Anya entered. "The mountain man graces us with his presence. And what bounty has your household produced?" Yorick called out, drawing all eyes to their meager offering. Old matron Liza stepped forward, her lips curled in satisfaction. "The ritual requires substantial contribution," she announced loudly. "Those who cannot sustain themselves cannot sustain the village." Whispers rippled through the crowd as Elias placed their small bundle on the communal table. The contrast was stark. Their offering looked pitiful beside the abundant displays of their neighbors. "This is all?" Liza prodded, lifting the bundle with 2 fingers as if it might soil her hands. "Perhaps you should have considered your limitations before taking a wife who cannot see to tend proper gardens." Anya stood tall, her face a mask of composure, while Elias's fists clenched at his sides. The public humiliation burned through him like wildfire. After the ritual songs were sung and the ceremonial bread broken, Elder Brinjar pulled Elias aside, his weathered face grave. "I speak not just as elder, but as one who remembers your father," the old man said quietly. "Winter approaches, and the council watches closely. You must prove your household's worth before the first heavy snow, or tradition dictates exile for those who cannot contribute." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. "Exile? The mountain is unforgiving to those without community support," Brinjar continued, compassion warring with duty in his eyes. "Find a way to demonstrate your value, or Liza will have her way." As they climbed back toward their cabin that evening, the looming threat of winter seemed to shadow their every step. Anya reached for Elias's hand in the gathering darkness, her touch a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The truth emerged on a bitter autumn evening when Elias returned from trading pelts in the valley. He found Marta the herbalist sitting with Anya by the hearth, their heads bent close in conversation. The women fell silent as he entered, but something in their posture told him secrets had been shared. "She deserves to know her history isn't forgotten," Marta said, rising to leave. She squeezed Anya's shoulder before departing, leaving Elias with questions hanging in the cold air. That night, as wind howled around their cabin, Anya revealed her past. Her fingers worked a small loom as she spoke, never faltering despite her sightless eyes. "I was the youngest master weaver the guild had seen in 3 generations," she explained, her voice steady but tinged with old pain. "My patterns were sought after from villages beyond the mountains." Elias listened, stunned to learn that the woman he'd been forced to marry had once commanded respect throughout the region. As her sight began to dim, old matron Liza had gradually stripped away her responsibilities, claiming her work had grown sloppy and unpredictable. "The truth was simpler," Anya continued. "Liza feared any talent that might overshadow hers. When my blindness became complete, she saw her opportunity." The mountain man felt a surge of anger as Anya described how the matron had arranged their marriage, presenting it to the village as an act of charity, while privately celebrating the removal of a rival. "She called me a burden to be shed," Anya said, her fingers never ceasing their work. But she underestimated what these hands remember. For weeks after this revelation, Elias watched his wife work in secret on an enormous harvest cloth. She wove before dawn and late into the night, refusing help, pouring every memory and hope into the intricate pattern. He brought her the finest dyes Marta could provide, saying nothing of the cost. When the autumn festival arrived, Elias carried the covered cloth to the village square. The crowd parted as they approached, whispers following in their wake. At the moment of unveiling, even Yorick fell silent. The harvest cloth blazed with color and patterns so complex it seemed to move before their eyes. Symbols of protection, prosperity, and healing were woven into a design that told the story of their valley with unprecedented skill. Elder Brynjar approached first, running weathered fingers over the cloth. "This is the work of a master," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. Across the square, old matron Lisa's face darkened with fury, but she could not deny what everyone saw. The blind woman's creation had silenced them all, transforming scorn into grudging respect with nothing but thread and stubborn determination. The first snow arrived with a whisper, then a roar. By morning, the mountain paths were sealed under a pristine white blanket, cutting Elias and Anya off from the valley below. Their cabin, once merely a shelter, became their entire world. Elias watched as Anya moved her fingers across the windowsill, feeling the frost patterns. "The snow speaks differently than rain," she said, her face tilted toward the glass. "It muffles everything, but makes the silence alive." Their stores were modest: dried meat, root vegetables, and whatever Elias had managed to hunt before the heavy snows. Scarcity became their constant companion, forcing a new intimacy between them. They rationed carefully, sharing meals at their small table, knees occasionally brushing in the confined space. One evening, as wind howled outside their cabin, Anya dropped a wooden cup. The sound of it rolling across the floor made Elias laugh unexpectedly. The blind woman joined him, her laughter light and musical, a sound he hadn't heard from her before. Something shifted between them in that moment. "I never thought I'd hear you laugh," she said, reaching out until her fingers found his arm. "I never thought I would either," he admitted. The mountain man began helping with daily chores he'd once left to her. He carried water, chopped extra firewood, and even attempted to learn the basics of cooking. His large hands were clumsy with the smaller tasks, but Anya never mocked his efforts. During the darkest hours of winter, when daylight was precious and brief, they sat beside the fire. Elias described the snow-covered landscape to her while she worked her loom. The rhythmic clicking became the heartbeat of their home. One evening, as he stoked the fire, Elias noticed something unusual in Anya's latest weaving. Among the threads, a pattern emerged, interlocking circles with small marks between them. His hands froze mid-motion. "Where did you learn this pattern?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Anya's fingers paused on the loom. "It came to me in dreams." "Why?" "My mother," Elias swallowed hard. "She used to weave this same symbol into everything she made. She called it the binding circles, said it connected those meant to find each other." The blind weaver's face remained composed, but her fingers trembled slightly. "Perhaps there are no accidents in this world," she said quietly. That night, lying in their separate sleeping areas, Elias stared at the ceiling beams. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet there it was, woven in wool and memory. What connection existed between his mother and this woman who had been thrust into his life? The question lingered like smoke in the rafters, promising secrets yet to be unraveled. The thunderous crash echoed across the valley, sending birds scattering into the gray winter sky. A massive landslide had torn away the eastern slope, burying the only trade route under tons of rock and frozen earth. Elias Thorson stood at the edge of his property, watching as a group of villagers trudged up the snowy path toward his cabin. "They're coming here," he muttered, recognizing Jorek's broad shoulders among them. Anya tilted her head, listening to the approaching footsteps. "How many?" "7, maybe 8, Elias replied, his jaw tightening. These were the same people who had mocked him, who had whispered behind his back about his blind wife. When they reached the clearing, Elder Brynjar stepped forward, his weathered face grave. "The landslide has cut us off from the winter stores in the northern settlement. Without those supplies, half the village won't survive until spring." And what does that have to do with me? Elias asked, crossing his arms. You know these mountains better than anyone, the elder said. We need you to guide us through the high passes. Jorik spat into the snow. We wouldn't be here if we had any other choice. Elias laughed bitterly. Now you need the mountain man? The same one you've ridiculed since he was a boy? Marta the herbalist stepped forward. People will die, Elias. Children. Inside their cabin later, Elias paced like a caged wolf. They deserve nothing from thee, he growled, throwing another log onto the fire. Anya sat by her loom, her fingers tracing the patterns she could no longer see. And what do you deserve, husband? She asked softly. The chance to be better than those who wronged you? Her words hung in the air between them. Elias stopped pacing, watching as she rose and found her way to him, without hesitation. You know these paths, she continued, taking his calloused hands in hers. I can help too. My ears hear what others miss. By dawn, they stood before 20 anxious villagers, including Jorik and Elder Brynjar. Elias had packed provisions and ropes, while Anya wore her warmest cloak, a walking stick in her hand. The journey will take 3 days, Elias announced. We leave now. Anyone who can't keep up gets left behind. As they set out, Anya walked confidently beside him, her stick tapping rhythmically against the frozen ground. Behind them followed the villagers who had once shunned them, now placing their lives in the hands of the mountain man and his blind wife. They'll remember this, Anya whispered, her breath clouding in the cold air. Elias nodded, scanning the treacherous path ahead. So will we. The blizzard descended without warning, transforming the mountain path into a swirling void of white. Elias Corbin strained to see even his own hands before him, as the howling wind tore at his clothes and stole his voice. The villagers huddled together behind him, their faces masks of terror. What had begun as a rescue mission now threatened to claim them all. We must turn back, shouted Jorik, his burly frame barely visible through the whiteout. The mountain man has led us to our deaths. Panic rippled through the group. Children wept as mothers clutched them closer. Elder Brynjar's weathered face showed resignation. He had seen such storms claim lives before. Elias felt a gentle tug at his sleeve. Anya stood beside him, her unseeing eyes closed as snowflakes collected on her eyelashes. The mountain man watched in bewilderment as his wife tilted her head, listening intently to something only she could perceive. The wind speaks differently here, she whispered, her words nearly lost in the gale. There's a hollow echo, a cave entrance, perhaps 20 paces to our right. Impossible, Jorik scoffed. She cannot even see. But desperation made Elias willing to trust. He took Anya's hand and let her lead. The blind woman moved with surprising confidence, her feet finding purchase on treacherous ground, as if guided by an unseen hand. The villagers followed reluctantly, clinging to one another. 19 steps later, the rock face appeared like a specter through the white veil. Anya's fingers traced the stone until they found the opening, a narrow crevice that widened into a sheltered cavern large enough for all. Once inside, Marta the herbalist approached Anya with wonder in her eyes. How did you know? She asked, her voice hushed with reverence. The storm creates patterns, Anya explained, her hands moving as if weaving invisible threads. I feel them in the air currents, hear them in how sound travels. The mountain speaks to those who listen. Word spread quickly among the shivering villagers. By morning, when the blizzard finally relented, the transformation was complete. Those who had once whispered blind burden behind cupped hands now murmured seer with awe. Even Jorik remained silent, his earlier mockery replaced by an uneasy respect. As they emerged into the brilliant sunlight reflecting off fresh snow, Elias noticed how the others now deferred to Anya, asking her opinion on the safest path home. The seer has saved us all, Elder Brynjar declared, bowing his head to the woman who had once been shunned. Perhaps there are kinds of sight beyond what our eyes provide. Elias watched his wife's face, seeing the subtle flush of acceptance warm her cheeks. Her blindness, once a mark of shame, had transformed into something revered, a gift that bridged the divide between them and the village in ways he never could have imagined. The fire crackled in the hearth as Elias and Anya sat together in the warmth of their cabin. Outside, winter winds howled against the wooden walls, but inside, a different kind of revelation was taking place. Sometimes, Anya whispered, her fingers working deftly at her loom, despite her blindness. I hear voices carried on the wind. She paused, her hands stilling. Not the ravings of madness, Elias, something else entirely. The mountain man studied his wife's face, noting the calm certainty in her expression. In the months since their union, he had witnessed her navigate their home with uncanny precision, predict storms before they arrived, and sense dangers that remained invisible to his own eyes. "What do they tell you?" he asked, his voice low and free of judgment. "They speak of changes in the weather, of animals moving through the forest." She smiled softly. "Sometimes they whisper of people's needs before they themselves know what troubles them." The next day, they ventured down to the village. Word of Anya's guidance during the blizzard had spread, transforming whispers of mockery into murmurs of awe. As they walked through the settlement, villagers nodded respectfully, a stark contrast to the scorn they once faced. Marta, the herbalist, approached them near the council hall. "The blind woman who sees more clearly than those with sight," she declared, loud enough for nearby villagers to hear. "Your gift is no curse, Anya. It's a blessing for our entire valley." Several villagers gathered around, sharing stories of how Anya had predicted the landslide or sensed the safe path through the storm. A mother stepped forward, describing how Anya had insisted she take a different route home one day, the very day a tree had fallen across her usual path. Old matron Lisa watched from the doorway of the weaving guild, her face tightening with each word of praise for Anya. The power she had wielded through fear and tradition was slipping through her fingers like sand. By midday, 3 villagers had approached Anya for counsel about planting decisions and a troublesome illness. Each time, she listened intently, her unseeing eyes somehow conveying deeper understanding than any healer had shown before. "The seer of the mountains," someone whispered, and the name caught like wildfire. That evening, as they climbed back toward their cabin, Elias took his wife's hand. "You never told me about this gift," he said. Anya squeezed his fingers gently. "I was waiting for you to be ready to hear it," she replied. "Just as I waited for the village to be ready to see me." The wind picked up around them, and for the first time, Elias listened differently, wondering what messages it carried to the remarkable woman by his side. The bitter winds of late winter whistled through the village, but the cold inside the council hall cut deeper. Old matron Liza stood before the gathered villagers, her finger pointed accusingly at the tapestry Anya had recently completed. "Look closely at these patterns," Liza declared, her voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "These are not symbols of protection, but harbingers of doom. Since this blind woman came among us, have we not suffered a landslide? A blizzard? The worst winter in memory?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elias Thornton watched as faces that had begun to warm toward them now hardened with suspicion. He felt his fists clench at his sides. "The old ways must be respected," continued the matron, her eyes sweeping the room. "This outsider weaves patterns unknown to our guild, patterns that call to forces beyond our understanding." Marta the herbalist rose to object, but several voices shouted her down. The blacksmith Jorik nodded vigorously, adding fuel to Lisa's accusations. "My forge has cooled 3 times this month," he called out. "Never happened before the mountain man brought his strange bride here." Anya sat perfectly still beside Elias, her face composed despite the growing hostility. Her fingers traced the edge of her shawl, the same confident movements she used when working at her loom. "They must leave before spring thaw," someone shouted from the back. Elias had endured isolation all his life, but watching his wife face this venom broke something inside him. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "My wife has brought nothing but wisdom to this valley," he said, his voice rough from disuse in public speaking. "Her weaving saved us during the blizzard. Her counsel guided us past the landslide." Lisa's lips curled into a thin smile. "And yet misfortune follows her like a shadow." "The misfortune," Elias countered, "comes not from patterns in cloth, but from poison in words." The hall fell silent. No one had ever heard the mountain man speak so boldly. "Anya was once the pride of your guild," he continued, gaining confidence, "until her sight failed and she became inconvenient to those who feared her skill." Elder Brynjar shifted uncomfortably in his seat at the head of the council table. His eyes met Elias's briefly before darting away. "This council will decide," Lisa declared, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We vote tomorrow on their fate." As they left the hall, villagers parted before them like water around stones. Elias placed his hand protectively on Anya's back, feeling the straight line of her spine, unyielding despite the weight of accusation. "They were beginning to accept us," Anya whispered as they walked home. "They still might," Elias replied, though uncertainty clouded his voice. "Tomorrow I will speak the truth, whatever it costs us." The council hall fell silent as Elder Brynjar rose from his seat, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he gripped his walking stick. The heated accusations against Anya had reached a fever pitch, with old matron Lisa leading the charge. Elias stood protectively beside his wife, his jaw clenched in determination. "I have remained silent for too many winters," Brynjar announced, his voice carrying surprising strength. "But I will bear this burden no longer." The elder's eyes fixed on Lisa, whose face had suddenly drained of color. 30 years ago, another weaver challenged the old ways, a woman named Sigrid. Elias flinched at the mention of his mother's name. She too incorporated mountain patterns into her work, patterns that Lisa claimed would bring misfortune. The villagers exchanged confused glances. Many of the younger ones had never heard this story, while recognition dawned on the faces of the elders. "Sigrid vanished after a particularly harsh council meeting," Brynjar continued. "We were told she left of her own accord, but I saw Lisa's men escort her beyond the ridge that very night." Gasps echoed through the hall. Elias felt his knees weaken as pieces of his childhood suddenly aligned. His mother had never abandoned him willingly. She had been forced away. "Is this true?" demanded one of the council members, turning to Lisa. The matron's face contorted with rage. "Sigrid threatened our traditions. Her weaving contained dangerous symbols that would have destroyed our way of life. The same symbols that appear in Anya's work," Marta the herbalist interjected, stepping forward. "Symbols that protected us during the blizzard, symbols that guided us to safety." Anya stood tall, despite the tension surrounding her. Though blind, her perception of the room's energy was uncanny. "These are not symbols of destruction," she said softly. "They are patterns of protection, passed down through generations of mountain people." Elias found his voice at last. "You took my mother from me," he said, the words directed at Lisa. "And then you sent me Anya, thinking her blindness would make her weak, that we would both remain outcasts." The blacksmith Jorik, who had long mocked Elias, now looked uncomfortable. "Is this why you've always kept the mountain man at arm's length?" he asked Lisa. "Fear that he might discover what happened to his mother?" The council erupted in angry voices. What had begun as an accusation against Anya had transformed into a reckoning with decades of manipulation and control. Elder Brynjar raised his hand for silence. "Today, we must decide not just the fate of one blind weaver, But whether our village will continue to be ruled by fear or embrace the wisdom that comes from both valley and mountain, the council hall fell silent as Anya stepped forward, her hands gently cradling the folded tapestry. Elias stood beside her, his weathered face a mixture of pride and apprehension. The mountain man had never imagined standing before the village elders, defending not just himself, but the woman who had transformed his solitary existence. "Before you judge," Anya said, her voice clear and unwavering despite the tension in the room. "See what my hands have created in the darkness of my world." She unfurled the tapestry with practiced grace, revealing a masterpiece that drew collective gasps from the assembly. The large cloth shimmered in the lantern light, its intricate patterns telling a story more powerful than any spoken testimony. Every thread spoke of connection, the sacred symbols of the weaving guild intertwined seamlessly with the rugged mountain patterns Elias had described to her during their long winter nights together. The blind weaver had created something unprecedented, a visual harmony between valley and peak, tradition and innovation. Elder Brynjar approached slowly, his fingers tracing the delicate work with reverence. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "The ancient protection symbols alongside the mountain paths. They complement rather than oppose one another." Marta pushed through the crowd, her eyes wide with understanding. "Look here," the herbalist pointed. "The pattern shows the landslide path where they guided us to safety. And here, the bear they faced together." Each element of the tapestry revealed another chapter of their shared journey. Even Jorik, standing sullenly at the back, could not deny the artistry before him. The blacksmith's usual mockery died on his lips as he witnessed the undeniable skill of the woman he had once ridiculed. Old matron Liza's face contorted with conflicting emotions. Her authority crumbled as villagers moved forward to examine the weaving more closely, exclaiming over details that spoke directly to their collective experience. "This is not merely cloth," Anya explained, her unseeing eyes somehow finding each council member in turn. "It is our story, all of us. The mountain and valley are one landscape, just as we are one community." Elias placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "My wife has woven what I could never express in words," he said, the term wife no longer foreign on his tongue, but spoken with quiet certainty. The council members exchanged glances, their resolution clear without need for debate. This tapestry represented more than reconciliation. It offered a new vision for their future together. The village that had once shunned both the mountain man and his blind bride now witnessed the power of their union, a bond stronger than tradition alone could ever forge. The first thaw came early that year, as if the mountains themselves were eager to wash away the winter's discord. Melting snow cascaded down the slopes in rivulets, feeding streams that had lain dormant beneath ice for months. In the village hall, Elder Brynjar stood before the assembled council, his weathered hands resting on a scroll of judgments. "The council has decided," he announced, his voice carrying to the back of the crowded room. "Old matron Liza is hereby removed from her position of authority within the Weaving Guild." The declaration sent ripples through the gathering. Liza, her face a mask of barely contained fury, sat rigid as the elder continued. The guild members, some with tears in their eyes, voted unanimously to reinstate Anya as their heart and guide. The blind weaver accepted with quiet dignity, her hands steady as she received the ceremonial spindle. "Your patterns have brought us together when division threatened to tear us apart," one of the younger weavers said, kneeling before her. "Teach us what you know." Elias watched from the edge of the crowd, his chest swelling with pride. The mountain man who had once valued solitude above all else now found himself drawn to the community that had finally recognized his wife's worth. When approached by several young men asking to learn the mountain paths and survival skills that had saved the village during the landslide, he surprised himself by agreeing. "I will teach what I know," he told them. But the mountains demand respect. They give life and take it just as easily. As the days lengthened, Elias and Anya established a new rhythm. 3 times each week, she would sit at the center of the guild hall, fingers dancing across threads as she instructed others in the ancient patterns. The same number of days, he would lead small groups into the foothills, showing them how to read the land, set snares, and find water hidden beneath stone. Their cabin, once a place of isolation, became a waypoint between village and wilderness. Visitors brought bread, mead, and stories in exchange for knowledge. Even Jorik, the blacksmith, eventually came, offering a finely crafted knife as a peace offering. The mountains change a man, Elias told Anya one evening as they sat before their fire. But not as much as you'd have changed me. She smiled, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his face. We have changed each other, and the village too. Their story spread beyond the valley, carried by Rurik the peddler, who now told a very different tale than before. What had begun as mockery, the mountain man and his blind bride, had transformed into a legend of resilience. As new green life pushed through the soil, Elias and Anya's union stood as testament that even the harshest winters eventually yield to spring. As the stars emerged over the mountain peaks, Elias and Anya sat together on the wooden bench outside their cabin. The evening air carried the scent of pine and spring's first blossoms. Elias wrapped a blanket around his wife's shoulders, his calloused hands lingering with a tenderness that would have shocked his former self. "I saw your mother last night," Anya whispered, her unseeing eyes directed toward the distant ridge. "In my dreams, she stood beyond the far mountains, gathering herbs just as you described." Elias felt his breath catch. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the gentle mountain breeze. "She spoke of threads that bind, not just cloth, but people." Anya's fingers traced the familiar pattern in the blanket she'd woven. "She said, your journey isn't finished, that you must continue weaving ties between your solitude and our community." The mountain man gazed at the horizon, wondering if his mother truly lived beyond those distant peaks. This mystery would remain unresolved, a question mark hanging over his future like the mist that clung to the valley at dawn. In the village below, lanterns flickered as families prepared for the evening meal. Where once there had been whispers and mockery, now there were tales of the blind seer and her husband who had saved them all. Elder Bringer had formalized their position in the community, granting them the respect that old matron Lysa had tried so desperately to deny them. "Marta brought news today," Anya said, smiling. "The Weaving Guild has commissioned 12 new apprentices. They wish to learn the ancient patterns." Elias nodded, remembering how the herbalist had become their staunchest ally. "And Jorik?" "The blacksmith asked if you might teach his son to set snares." She replied, amusement in her voice. "It seems even the proudest can change." Their story had transformed from village scandal to legend. How a man who sought isolation and a woman cast aside for her blindness had found in each other not just companionship, but salvation. Their union, arranged through deceit, had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that first night when he lifted her veil. As darkness settled over the mountains, Elias took Anya's hand in his. Together, they had weathered scorn and hardship, blizzards and betrayal. In the coldest winds, they had woven a legacy of love and resilience that would outlast even the harshest winter. "Perhaps tomorrow," Elias said quietly, "we could begin preparing for a journey beyond the ridge." Anya smiled, squeezing his hand. "I've already started packing."